You've probably heard of tart cherry juice being used for sleep, but do you understand why it works? Hello everyone and welcome into today's video. My name is Britton and this is That Brainy Bee. We cover botany every month. It's called Brainy Botany, and this month we're focusing on cherry. As with all of my Brainy Botany videos, we're gonna start with an overview of the botanical description. We'll touch on the touch, taste, and feel of cherries and some of the different species. Then we'll shift into the historical and traditional uses. I'll give you some tips on harvesting and preparations and ways to preserve cherries for the season. I will obviously touch on disclaimer, caution, and considerations because I feel like it would be unethical for me not to, and then we'll conclude. Today we're mainly going to focus on Prunus serotina, which is our wild cherry version. Wild black cherry grows here in the Midwest. We'll also briefly mention some of the other species that you'll see commonly, like Prunus avium, and that's what I write about on my blog. So if you're more of a reader, you can hop over to my blog, thatbrainybee.com, and you can read about cherries because I did a really extensive and detailed writing of just the history. So if you're interested, you can go ahead and click the link in my description. I'll also put and share some other links throughout this video. But let's get into it. For our Prunus serotina, the bark is pretty easy to spot. It's often said to look like a burnt potato chip. Some might also say that it looks like a burnt cornflake. It also depends on where it's at in the season. The leaves are long and narrow and they have tiny teeth, and in the summer you'll see the dark cherry fruit form. It's actually often observed that cherries are one of the first flowering trees, but they're one of the last fruiting trees. Our black cherries are gonna appear a lot differently than what cherries are used in like fruit pies and like different jams and jellies. And cherries are classified as a drupe. If you'd like to hear more about drupe and drupelets, you can also watch our videos on like raspberries, blackberries. Obviously that's very similar. It has the fleshy outside parts and then it has the seed on the inside. The skin is called the exocarp. And then you also have the mesocarp, which is the pulp, the fleshy part, mucilage as well. And then you have the endocarp, which is the layer that contains the pit. The mesocarp also contains the pectin, and then you have your endosperm. So our cherry trees are going to look very different depending on the species. Obviously you can have your sour cherries, which are a bit more orangey and maybe have some like yellowy. You have your tomato cherries, which are tomatoes. They're not even your typical like cherry that we associate cherry with. And then you also have some toxic lookalikes, so you want to be careful with like the species just in general, with not dogwoods, with choke cherries. With choke cherries, you want to be cautious and make sure that you're identifying it very good. Berries can be very dangerous. I don't know if you guys have watched Hunger Games. It pairs really well with like Alicampe, licorice, mullein, so you kind of see the paired synergistic effect of like helping your respiratory system. And if you're using it medicinally, it is safe for long-term use. It's just if you're pregnant, you might want to be cautious because of like the tannin contents and such. But we see cherries in a lot of stuff, and cherries might be in your daily intake anyway. If you already eat them, then it's probably not a concern for you to continue eating them how you are, but if you're trying to do therapeutic medicinal dosages, then you might want to be cautious if you are pregnant and maybe bring it to a provider. Since I already kind of briefly mentioned them, let's just go ahead and jump ahead to the comparisons. So yes, we want to watch out for toxic lookalikes. If you are going out and wildcrafting, foraging, and harvesting, always make sure that you have some kind of identification. Don't only base your IDing off of the app Plant ID. I love Plant ID. I know that some herbalists and people really actually hate it, but I believe that it's very helpful. I believe it can be very helpful. Yes, there is margin of error. There's margin of error with everything, but also have some other forms, like maybe a website that you trust for your state. You can look up your like garden extension, master gardening extension. I find sometimes I'll even use other states' master garden extensions just because I like them better, but I'll make sure that I'm like looking for my area specific. I always do some research before I'm picking a new plant as well. I think the best rule of thumb too is if you're in the field and you see a plant and you're not exactly sure what it is, I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't pick it, I wouldn't try it, I wouldn't eat it. Like, you can maybe do a little nibble on it, but even that might be dangerous. Other versions of cherries that you'll see more commonly is obviously we have like Bing cherries, we have sweet cherries, so Prunus avium. There's also Prunus cerasus, and then there's Cornus cherries as well. There are lots of different varieties of cherries and cultivars, and so I can't cover all of them in this video, but they're really interesting to learn about like the slight alterations and differences with them. How cherries feel and touch and taste will also appear a little differently. If we're looking at sweet versus sour, I think we can kind of make the connection that one is going to be sweeter and one is going to be more sour taste. Combining it with the licorice, combining with the mullein could also give some soothing mucilaginous act. Because of those glycosides, it's also a mild sedative. As we said, it's good for suppressing coughs if you're using it correctly, but also there's lots of research going into like melatonin tendencies and the melatonin-like associations with cherries and improved sleep, and like there's research studies you can read about. I think I saw one, older adults being researched with insomnia, drinking tart juice. How does tart juice help with the insomnia? There's lots of really interesting research studies you can I'll link that specific study below if I can find it. That cooling portion as well is super nice during the summertime. I always think of like hibiscus as cooling, and cherries can kind of fall in that category as well. They can be really delicious in certain drinks. So my best example as like cooling and warming, this is the example I use every time, is comparing lemons to oranges, comparing grapefruits to limes. I would consider grapefruits and oranges as more warming, and then lemon is going to be more cooling. Often you'll find lemon is used in the summertime. It's paired with mints. It's wonderful in different drinks. You have lemonade, and then in the wintertime you switch to more like apple ciders, and you'll find orange and citrus is really well paired with like cloves. Even if you think of Christmas time and the smells associated with Christmas time, there's beautiful like garlands made with dried oranges and grapefruit, and it just smells so like warming. It's a warm smell. So cherries do fall under that cooling, summery category. What's really interesting about them is even though they're cooling, they are more of a like fall time fruit because they're one of the last fruits to come up about in the late summertime. Okay, so let's move into talking about the history and traditional uses. I am super excited to cover this, but I'm going to be missing out lots of details that you'll be able to find on the blog. So traditionally, actually, before the fruit was used, the bark was used by the Chippewa Indian, the different tribes, different indigenous tribes, and the bark was used as like a cough syrup. It was made into a cough syrup, and actually different cherry woods have been excavated from archaeological sites, and they've been made into like javelins. They were arrows, they were used for different weapons, and the material was used to make different things. They actually didn't become a staple for like cough syrup, and they didn't really become fully commercially industrialized until 18 to 1900s. So up until the 1800s, that's kind of when drama happened, and actually like cherry was considered a royal fruit. And so they would plant it at the royal gardens in the UK. It got an award as well. It was a really well-known tree. It was planted along roadsides. It was very popular. It became very popular, but then like post-war, it kind of lost the popularity. Communism came in, and people didn't like how it was being like industrialized, and a lot of the gardens and trees were actually destroyed. But it wasn't until like the 1900s, the 1900s, when benzaldehyde was like cornered out. It was what am I trying to think of? Oh my, when they first isolated benzaldehyde, they isolated benzaldehyde, and that is what was used and kind of replaced like actual cherries. It became the shelf-stable flavor, and cherry became like the face of flavor essentially. We see cherry in like chapstick. Cherry was really easy to put into arcade games. We see it in Pac-Man. It's in a lot of like I don't know if you guys ever played, but there's a game on the computer where you have like a little basket and you're catching cherries that are falling from the tree. There's the board game with cherries. Cherry really became like the face of lots of different things, and it was once again industrialized. So our modern over-the-counter cough syrups are gonna be the artificial cherry flavor instead of the natural cherry, or using cherry bark. It's gonna have the benzaldehyde compound. It was really interesting to read about like all of the history of cherry and how they came to be what we see them as today, how it became popular in chapstick, and just how it entered the commercial world. So let's go ahead and move into harvesting and preparation tips. I'm gonna give you guys some really good recipe ideas, and then you can also find a printable on my website for just some uses, ways to prepare, all of this just in general. So with any harvesting, you just want to be smart. You want to try and get the best fruit. If there's lots of like little cherries, can be kind of gross. Even though they're high up in the trees, they still get bugs and like larvae in them, and birds are eating and pecking at them. So you do want to try and grab what looks best, ones that don't have lots of holes in them, ones that aren't rotted. If there's lots of like yellowing leaves, and just if the tree doesn't look healthy, I wouldn't grab fruit from it. I put my cherries in vinegar and ice afterwards. It helps to get rid of the maggots, or not maggots, that would be really gross. It helps to get rid of the larvae. And it is gross. You have to let it sit for a while. You can look up tutorials online, but it's gross. If you are using the bark, it's gonna be the young or small twigs that you're using. You're not gonna rip it off of the main tree. You're gonna want to find like young twigs, or you can clip the young twigs off of the tree. Never girdle the tree. Just never girdle the tree, please. And it could be made into an oxymel. It's best as like a tincture. You could do, or just simply make a tea decoction. The decoction is going to be best done with the bark. I'm sure you can make like cherry tea. I don't, there's going to be a different process for that because like the fruits, maybe you can use the leaves. I would double check that. I am not familiar with using. I would maybe look up a tutorial, because it also depends on like if you're using black cherry bark, and if you look at the environment, when is the best time to harvest, what are their tips on your garden extension for harvesting it, and just go off of them. Go off of the recipes. You can like stray from the recipe, but it's good to have some kind of like baseline to go off of, and just don't over harvest. That's probably the biggest tip and best thing. Only take what you need and leave some for the plant to recover. Some easy uses and ideas for using cherries is they pair really good in like stews, maybe like a lamb stew. Cherry, the flavor cherry pairs really good with like dark meats like roast beef. I think it'd be really good on meatloaf. That brings me into sauces. So you can do a sauce or a marinade with cherries. I made a cherry barbecue sauce that was really fun to try out, and it tasted super good. It just blended really well with the spices. So that's another way. Mess around with different sauces and spices, marinades. You could probably make like a marinara sauce with cherries instead of tomatoes and have a bit of like a sweeter flavor for it. I think that could pair really well with mozzarella as well. Put it in drinks. You can obviously put cherries in drinks. You can maybe put frozen cherries in drinks. That could be fun. Or you can make a simple syrup and then you have that for putting in your drinks. I like to drizzle it on my yogurt. There's lots of different ways to use that as well. Of course, you can make jams and jellies. This is a little bit more of an involved process and it takes a little bit longer. You need some more materials, but it's worth it in the end, and then you can give it to your friends and family. It lasts a lot longer, and I think it just preserves it really good. You can also make a pemmican. This is a traditional recipe. There's wines, also cherry liquor was really popular back in the day. You can still find cherry liquor today. Think of like amaretto too. Amaretto is kind of like, I don't know, it's not cherry, but it's like cherry. It makes me think of benzaldehyde. That's what I was thinking of. Amaretto. Benzaldehyde makes me think of amaretto. There are lots of different ways to using your cherries. You can look on my blog for recipe ideas. Otherwise, you can go ahead and check out the printable down below. It's just a guide to help you preserve and save cherries, and I give some tips on harvesting and growing. If you would like that barbecue recipe idea, you can either find it on the blog or you can find it in the printable I'm sharing with you guys. Otherwise, go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next upload, and don't forget that you are loved. Peace.